Hi everyone, this is John Daly. I am back with another episode of the Daily Express. Today I have on another return guest. He is a lawyer and investigator and a former congressional staffer. He works on national security related issues and he's also a columnist. You can check out his writing on Deseret News and the Dispatch. And we published a piece of his last week here on bernardgoldberg.com. I'm talking about Clifford Smith. How's it going today, Cliff?
It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining me. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than they usually go. I was originally going to wait until this weekend to do my next podcast episode at the Principles First Summit in DC. I'm looking forward to that. But Cliff reached out to me because he had some thoughts on USAID or USAID, however people like to pronounce it, but it's the United States Agency of International Development. The agency has been in the news in recent weeks, of course, because of Elon Musk and the DOGE crew basically trying to kill it through the Trump administration as a cost-cutting measure. Cliff, you know quite a bit about this agency. You've been a critic of how things have been operating there, but you have some, I would say, nuanced thoughts on what's been going on over the past few weeks. So I just wanted to kind of turn you loose so you could share your background and your perspective on this topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, this I have to say is something I have found extremely frustrating because, as you mentioned, I am a longtime critic of USAID and a lot of the ways it does business. And yeah, long story short, for many years I worked something called the Middle East Forum, where I did a lot of different things, but a big part of my day for quite a few years was taken up with trying to point out how USAID was getting things wrong. It was giving money to terrorists, it was partnering with radicals, it was undermining America's mission in different places. Those things are absolutely legitimate concerns. I could point you to some really horrific things that absolutely are a problem and have happened. My favorite is probably the first one I worked on, and that was when World Vision, a major USAID contractor, sent USAID funds directly to the Islamic Relief Agency in Sudan. It's a designated terrorist entity that was designated for funding Osama bin Laden, of all people. Um, they did this, and they were extremely hesitant to change course, even after it was repeatedly shown to them that these guys were bad, basically because they were feared getting kicked out of Sudan. The then dictator of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, was trying to steer funds towards places he liked and people he trusted. He personally sat on the board of Islamic Relief Agency, so no shocker, he wanted money to go to there. Basically, they looked the other way, pretended they didn't see what was going on. I don't know. I have my suspicions based on thousands of documents I've reviewed. But either way, they did it. And once they finally got caught, they resisted still. And they basically fought to be able to give a second payment to this organization anyway because they were feared of getting kicked out of Sudan and basically just didn't want to change direction and thought somehow the fact that maybe this money was getting to children made everything okay. The Senate Finance Committee investigated this scandal that was unearthed by my former colleague and myself. They found that World Vision was borderline negligent. They pointed out that there have been other problems with USAID. There have been several other scandals I could mention where I got Congress, the USAID Inspector General, or other actors involved in rooting out legitimate waste, fraud, abuse, corruption. These are real problems. They're real problems that matter. I don't want to pretend they don't. As a matter of fact, it's frustrating to me to have to sort of take the stance I'm going to take, and that is, having said all of this, and I could go on for hours about the different abuses that are going on, frankly, what has happened in the past few weeks in USAID has made me sick. Number one, I think it's illegal, and I think it's pretty clearly illegal. Number one, USAID, contrary to what some people on Twitter have been saying, was not in its current iteration, was not founded in an executive order. Yes, the original version of it was founded by an executive order by John Kennedy in the 60s. It was codified, however, by a Republican House and a Republican Senate in 1998 as its own independent entity. The idea that you can feed that to the wood chipper, as Elon Musk put it, full stop, is madness. It clearly can't be done legally, and any attempt to do so is illegal, and I think will be found so by the courts. That's a big deal to me. It doesn't really matter if I like a policy or not. I don't like illegal things done. My loyalty is to the separation of powers in the Constitution first and foremost. And this is just the start of many illegal things DOGE has done, I think. There's been all kinds of writings by legal experts on what has happened in terms of sensitive data that USAID has had, in terms of attempting to lay off workers or furlough workers that they've done. None of this appears to be holding up to legal muster. I mean, Musk is essentially a glorified White House staffer. The idea that he should be able to control agency operations himself without any supervision from others in the administration, in the agencies themselves that are confirmed by the Senate, is madness. And I think most of this will eventually get found to be illegal. So that's one big thing. Perhaps the biggest thing, frankly, in my view. That said, while I am a fierce critic of USAID in terms of I think it does a poor job of vetting its partners, I think it too often looks the other way when it's being controlled or used by dictators, all that kind of stuff, all of it's true. It doesn't change the fact that it is an instrument of soft power that works for America, and it occasionally does so very valuably. A lieutenant general that is now retired named Mark Hertling recently wrote a really good article explaining in a lot of detail how USAID programs were key during the surge in Iraq. Anybody that has even taken a superficial look at what happened in Iraq can tell you that one of our problems and why it became necessary to have the surge was because terrorist entities, Iran, other bad actors were essentially crowding out U.S. soldiers because they gave assistance. They gave, sometimes threatened people, sure, but they also gave aid and assistance to populations which the U.S. didn't match at first. It was only when they really started working with USAID closely to basically get that aid, they were able to get local populations to turn toward the U.S., which helped us win a war. That's important. PEPFAR in Africa, for example, something that George W. Bush created, saves 25 million lives. That's a lot of lives. I'm not someone that's an endless bleeding heart. I don't think that the U.S. can or should solve every problem in the world. But I do think, America is a superpower, and I do think it has a duty to do some, humanitarian things when it can and nobody else can. That was certainly the case with PEPFAR. And what's more, that has served our interests. That's been a huge victory for the U.S.'s image in Africa. Matter of fact, so much so that many of our adversaries, Russia in particular, has sought to demonize U.S. aid efforts more broadly, not just USAID, but any sort of U.S. efforts in the U.S., or in Africa, that is, specifically because they know it wins us friends in a place they want to influence. That's all in jeopardy with this, bizarre pause, unpause, nobody really knows what's going on, handling of this issue. I could go on and on and on. The bottom line is this is benefiting our foes, and it is hurting the cause of legitimate reform of USAID, which does need reform, which does need more accountability, and which does not need to sort of think of itself as this unaccountable agency, off in the hinterland somewhere doing good works. It's not that good works are bad, but that good works unencumbered by accountability and by a real sense that, if you do this wrong, there are consequences, doesn't usually end well. I've compared this movement, or I'm comparing it, I should say, in a future article, to the defund the police movement of the 2020. The Democrats, mostly on the left, they got all enraptured with the admittedly horrifying murder of George Floyd and the abuse of other minorities by police And there were numerous legitimate issues that were raised by this movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, if you want to call it, whatever these issues, focus on these kinds of issues was in the 2020s. Then some wise ass came up with the idea to defund the police and make this the centerpiece of their campaign in 2020. Biden, to his credit, never went along, but all kinds of offices running for Congress did. The wider movement was saddled with it. Guess what it wound them up? It wound up hurting them badly. Jim Clyburn, the highest-ranking African American in Congress at the time, was quite clear that he thought it lost him seats in Congress. He thought it made Biden's majority in 2020 more narrow, and it basically halted the movement on issues they cared about. I don't expect USAID to reach quite the same level because, frankly, as important as it is to our foreign affairs and to people in Africa or South Asia or Eastern Europe or other places where USAID is active, it is not, it doesn't affect people's day-to-day lives quite the way that defund the police would or did. However, at the end of the day, Americans are compassionate people. And, if PEPFAR falls apart and AIDS explodes in Africa, it is fantasy to think that that is not going to blow back on the very people that were pitching, put USAID in the wood chipper. It's fantasy to think that's not going to affect them politically. So, anyway, long rant, but I'm trying to make the point here that one of the hardest places to be in politics, and perhaps the most necessary, is by telling people you have a legitimate concern, and yet your solution either is not working, will not work, or is unworkable, or is just flat out wrong. This is one of those situations where I think that the critics of USAID have all kinds of legitimate concerns. They have a poor system for vetting, particularly their subgrantees. They do not look at the ideology of the people they partner with far too often. There are many times where I think there are programs that have been filtered through USAID that do not serve America's interests, or at best are tangential to it, or in sometimes even undermine it. But that doesn't mean that you can take, an axe to the entire thing and not get significant blowback. Even if you're going to take some of the academic literature, that there are those that argue in the academy that USAID crowds out, for example, other forms of financial, basically crowds out other forms of assistance. It enables corruption by the government, things of this nature. I think there's some validity to some of those concerns in some situations. I think it's something to take seriously. But even if you were going to take the stance that the U.S. should wind down these kinds of programs, doing it this way in a sort of shock and awe campaign is going to lead to predictable results. It's going to lead to people thinking the U.S. is not a reliable partner and going to China, going to Russia, going to our foes, and it's going to hurt people in the process. And none of the legitimate issues of waste, fraud, and abuse, of ideological blindness, of unaccountability at USAID are going to be fixed this way.
I think that you brought up that phrase "shock and awe." That I saw that used somewhere else in regard to this situation. I think that's correct. It's when you put these jobs and not so much the jobs, but the agencies themselves, on the chopping block, without really understanding what's going on if these agencies are looking at the big picture, I think is very problematic. It's just like, this is DOGE is doing a lot of this. Elon Musk will, find something interesting, but a lot of times he's out there saying things that aren't true. He's misinterpreting what he's finding.
Yeah.
He gets everybody worked up over things that aren't even correct in the first place. And not just him, but just all these executive actions that are flying all over the place right now. It's sort of an ongoing theme. We have this is unrelated, but we have this story now with the Trump administration firing a bunch of people who were overseeing our nation's nuclear stockpile, and then realizing, oops, that was a bad idea. They're trying to hire these people back, and they can't figure out where some of them are. They don't have contact information.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of right now, that's a lot of what I feel DOGE is doing, where they're not quite sure what they're doing. They just want to have something to boast about.
Yeah, I agree, and there's sort of several underlying things that I think you're kind of getting at here. One is that, well, number one, I should say, the idea that this is about saving the government money is not true. I mean, even assuming that, you see, this is one other thing that gets caught up in all the rigmarole, is that when you have someone doing something really dumb, you also have people trying to moderate it into something sensible. I mean, this happened during the defund the police movement. You had people going defund the police, and you had people saying, no, 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 this is just about, we want more counselors, to try to deal with mentally ill people during, interactions with the police, and we want more training for police and how to handle situations and da da da. And then somebody comes out and says, with an op-ed in the New York Times, which said, no, we literally want to abolish the police. I mean, you sort of have the battle between the sensible people and the not sensible people. And the problem is, when the process starts nonsensibly, it usually doesn't correct itself to sensible easily or quickly. So, Marco Rubio is running around trying to say that, well, look, this is about all these sensible reforms, and, maybe we ought to fold it back into state and all this other kind of stuff. And then Trump says a few days later, shut it down, shut it down. Nobody really knows for sure what's going on, so you get stuck with one of these kind of problems. But more, so my point is, though, a lot of this is being done sort of for shock value. It's not really a thoughtful approach to dealing with any of these issues. I mean, look, at best, slightly over 1% of the U.S. federal budget goes to foreign assistance. And that's more than just USAID. That goes to many different programs. So, I mean, I don't know the sub number of USAID per se, but let's say it's 0.5% of all the money that goes, of the federal budget that goes there. I think it's even less than that. But, you could cut 100% of it. All the staff, all the programs, just all overnight, and you wouldn't even touch our problems meaningfully. I mean, it's the equivalent of a guy that weighs 300 pounds and needs to lose 100 pounds saying he's still going to eat a stack of 12 pancakes and eat, 6 sausage links for breakfast, but he's going to cut the creamer out of his coffee. You're not losing weight that way. You're focusing on the wrong thing. So that's one thing. Another thing is you're kind of pointing to one of my favorite life lessons that I have internalized more and more as I've, I guess, gotten beyond the age of about 20. And that is the fable of Chesterton's Fence. I'm not sure if you've heard this little fable, but G.K. Chesterton was a writer and a philosopher in the 1800s, early 1900s, and he famously told a story of a young man that saw a fence in a field and said that, I want to get rid of this fence. It doesn't look like it's doing anything. And the response was, young man, if you can't tell me what this fence does, I'm certainly not going to let you take it down. If you look at it for a while and explain what the fence does, I might let you take it down, but not before. The point being, unless you understand why something is, you can't really fix it. And anything you're going to do to try to fix it is just going to create wreckage. It's an almost perfect explanation of what is going on right now. It's emotionally satisfying to those people that know very little and they want the government cut. And so it makes for good theatrics. It doesn't make for good governance. It doesn't make for good budgeting. It doesn't even make good for USAID reform. But it makes good theatrics. And in my opinion, you should fear politicians that want to give you nothing but theatrics.
I think you say that well when you talk about an emotional reaction, because I see people, I'm a fiscal conservative. I know you are as well. We remain fiscal conservative, when things sort of changed in the Republican Party in 2016. And I think some people who kind of gave that part of their positioning up through the first Trump, term, they sort of kind of got it back during the Biden one. But I think they've been sort of waiting for an excuse to really some sort of fiscal conservatism they can cheer again, I guess. And I think this is, I mean, this stuff, like you said, in the grand scheme of things, what Elon's talking about is just minuscule, as far as spending goes. I feel like I'll give you a little comparison. You put one out there too, but I feel like we're sort of on Jurassic Park Island, and people are running around, running for their lives from these huge, vicious dinosaurs. We'll call them entitlement spending. And Elon Musk and his crew are off to the side somewhere decapitating grasshoppers and being hailed for their bravery as these warriors. And I just, this is all just fluff. I totally on board with going after real waste, with going after real corruption. By all means, let's do it. Let's do it smart. Let's so we
I
know what we're doing in a way that we know we're doing. But this is people say, he's really getting the budget, under wraps. He's doing no such thing,
I
and the
think
Republicans are proposing all kinds of new spending. So it's not getting any better.
excuse me if I hope I get the author right. I believe it was Jim Garrity at National Review mentioned, Elon Musk is the, 72 trillionth person to go after the magical pot of money that you can get from waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. I mean, that's just the truth. Look, any government, I mean, even any corporation is going to have some amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in it. It's just inevitable. And it's not bad to try to cut it. Some are better than others, some are worse than others. But the idea that you can fix your real problems with that is just nonsense. Anybody that claims to be a fiscal conservative and is not serious about reforming unpopular things to reform, reforming Social Security, reforming Medicare, reforming Medicaid, things like this, they're simply lying to you. I mean, at the end of the day, you could cut 100% of the non-defense, non-entitlement spending, and you'd still wind up with a budget problem eventually. It's not even that far away. So, anybody that doesn't take these things seriously has another agenda in mind, and it's not fixing the budget. And you need to realize that.
No, that's absolutely right. And I don't know. This is so years ago. I think it was 2008. Right? Yeah. I was a volunteer for Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign. This was back before he was crazy, and he kind of came up with it. At the time, he got a lot of criticism for, but I think he said he basically to help deal with excess spending, and he admitted on a very small level, but in these different agencies, I think he said he would basically put out an order for every agency to cut spending by 10%, and that they would know how to do it the best. They would know where to look. I don't know if that's the answer either, but I feel like it's probably something like that is a better solution.
It's a lot better than what's going on, that's for sure. I mean,
yeah,
there's the populism, or the sort of the us versus them, we the people versus the elite, the that kind of thinking. I mean, look, it has a superficial appeal to it, right? I mean, we're Americans. We don't like to be told what to do. We think we ought to be able to run our own affairs, and that is largely a good thing. I think that has saved America from a lot of problems. It also has a dark side. There is a reason, for example, why the founding fathers created the Electoral College. There's a reason why we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. There's a reason why we don't vote on everything. We believe in a deliberative process. We do recognize that having some level of knowledge and expertise is necessary to making smart choices. And this is sort of the opposite of that. I believe, I might be misquoting slightly here, but there was a time where Washington was questioned essentially about the idea of direct democracy, and he said something, the idea of, and leave the fate of America in the hands of the ignorant masses. I mean, that sounds horrible coming from someone like Washington, who believed in so much in against monarchy, against oligarchies, things like that. But he also recognized that pure populist rage isn't any better than a monarchy. It's essentially, to quote a movie, one tyrant 1,000 miles away is no better than 1,000 tyrants 1 mile away. And we're sort of and that's what I sort of think what's going on here in a sense. I mean, you basically have people that are cheering on something they don't understand because they weren't supposed to. Because they trust. We should have gatekeepers that we trust. It should be members of Congress that are looking at this. And to their credit, very imperfectly, but they were to some degree. I mean, I mentioned the World Vision Islamic Relief Agency scandal. Chuck Grassley did an investigation into that, and he was in the middle of doing an investigation into another abuse of World Vision and USAID money that was stolen by Hamas in Gaza. He was in the middle of that when all this blew up. It's a small thing. It's nowhere near all the problems, but the point is that those are the kinds of hard work things you need to do to actually make progress. Not stunts that I think will inevitably blow up in your face. I mean, let's say, for the sake of argument, all this stuff is somehow found to be legal, and they actually managed to shut down USAID for 4 years. Well, there is literally nothing stopping, President Elizabeth Warren for bringing it back and doubling it with even less accountability. Governing is hard. Putting out press releases and locking doors and doing things like this is a lot easier.
I think that's true. I think that's true. Well, I think that was some very useful insight, Cliff. I'm glad that you reached out to me to talk about this. I think it's important that people understand this. I've touched on this a little bit in my writing, but I don't have the expertise on it that you do, and I'm glad you came on here and laid it out that way. And I think it'll give people something to think about for sure.
Well, thanks very much, Sean. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like last time, it was great having you on the Daily Express, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
You too.